Okay, let's get started. Welcome to today's webinar on UFT Developer Grid and Nodes. My name is Sanjeev Ranjan. I'm Technical Account Manager for UFT Family Products within SaaS organization in OpenText. First of all, let's try to understand what UFT Developer Grid and Nodes are and how UFT Developer Grid environment really works. So UFT Developer Grid basically allows you to run tests on different environments and browsers as well as devices. So you can use the UFT developer grid to run the same test operations on different environments by changing the parameters the test case uses basically to describe the required environments. So you can also leverage the power of your testing lab and achieve distributed parallel execution by running all of your tests on the grid locally or remotely. So letting the grid allocate nodes for each test run uh, if required. So in order to set up a UFT developer grid, you need to have two kind of machines. One will be the grid manager, which is the central component, and this will be connected to all the different UFT developer grid nodes. So on the nodes, you can decide basically uh, yourself what should be the operating system. So you can have here a Windows machine, you can have a Mac, you can have an Ubuntu for the you can in case of Ubuntu you can have for the Linux environment basically. So you can also on these machines you can decide what should be the browser you'll be running. So you have a Mac, so you could be having a Safari browser on that. On the Windows you can have Edge Chromium browser. So if you want to run a test on your application, so it's basically you have that flexibility to choose your browser. So once you will set up those nodes from each other and define the capability, what should be covered by the different nodes. So you can also plan to set up the nodes with multiple version of browser. So it's not about only one browsers can be configured on those nodes. You can have various versions of the same browser on each and every node. So that capability is also there. So you could have a node which is running various Chrome browser, for example, or like the latest version of Chrome browser or any previous version could also be configured on your node machine. Apart from that, you can also make use of devices, the mobile devices basically. Either you connect it locally with local device plugin, or you connect with a device using the UFT Digital Lab, which we have in OpenText basically. So this setup is a completely flexible setup. So it's up to you what you want and how you want to configure this whole UFT developer grid and nodes environment basically. So when it comes to grid manager, you also have a capability or flexibility to host this grid manager either on Windows or Mac or a Linux environment. In our case, it is Ubuntu right now. So we can host our grid manager as well on your choice of operating system basically. So you'll see a lot of flexibilities there, a lot of configurations, options are there, which basically you need to identify and decide yourself based on your business needs, how you want to test your application and on what all operating system, what all browsers, what all different versions of those browsers, mobile devices. So each and everything can be covered within UFT developer grid and nodes setup. So now let's see how the execution happens locally without the grid and node setup. So if you don't have the grid and node setup of UFT developer, we can still see how it really works. So I have captured session basically, a video. So let's start with UFT developer initiation. So we are going to initiate UFT developer runtime engine first of all, which runs locally on this machine. So we'll wait for that to trigger, and now we'll see at the right hand side there will be a UFT developer runtime engine activation notification basically. So we'll wait for that. Yeah, that is up there. So now we will open ID IntelliJ, which is our, you can say, development platform, which is basically integrated with UFT developer and provides platform to write the script for our test automation. So here you will see I have written a piece of code which basically goes through different browsers. So this one we'll see that there is a Chrome piece of it, code is there. There is another piece for Edge. So what basically happens, we are planning to hit an URL of a demo website basically which OpenText has. It's called Advantage Online Shopping. So test is basically hit the URL on different browsers without grid and nodes basically. So it's now just using UFT developer capability without the nodes and grid setup. So this is going to be executed locally on my machine. So let's execute that, and you'll see now that it's getting initiated here at the left hand side, and it's going to open up the Advantage Online Shopping portal here. So you'll see that it happened on the Edge Chromium, and now it's gonna open Chrome browser, and it will show you or open up that URL of Advantage Online Shopping and then close it down. So that test happens. Now you see a test passed notification here. And now once that is done, you will see the two tests which got triggered, Edge and Chrome, has been passed. And now we can also see our last run result of this execution. So this is basically a UFT HTML report which shows the execution results for both the tests, so whether it is Edge or Chromium. So we have all the happy scenarios, and it is basically a past situation for us with the help of a UFT developer without grid and nodes. So that's one of the scenario which I wanted to highlight here. So let's see, that is fine, right? So we did execution without UFT developer grid and nodes. So now we need to as a next step, we need to see how the whole setup works with grid and node system or the environment. So what I have prepared is basically I have two machines which I'm going to share on the screen. So this is one of Windows 10 client machine where we want to execute the test of the same test basically, opening up Advantage Online Shopping URL, and I have another machine basically which is Windows 2019 server version. Excuse me. So this is a 2019 server version which is going to be basically hosting our execution. So these are two things working as a node for us for our this demo purpose. So we are going to just move it down. So basically on these two machines, the remote machine, what we have is two different browsers configured. If you look closely at these, so I have this 2019 server with a Chrome browser. So this machine is going to basically host or take execution for those test cases where the need is for opening that test case only for the Chrome browser, where the situation for another machine is it's going to take the instructions from Grid Manager to execute the test on the Chromium browser. So it has Chromium, and both the operating systems are different. It is Windows 10 and it is 2019 server version. So we could have added Linux, for example, or Mac, but for the simplicity of this session, I just took up this Windows to showcase how it really works. Okay, so let's see how we can configure it. So now what I have is basically I have opened up this IntelliJ, which has uh, the code basically which was getting executed locally. All right, so it is basically without the whole UFT developer grid and node setup. So this is the piece of code which I executed earlier. So this has basically, you can see here, it has just a instruction that you open up Chrome browser and execute the main test here. So the main test is basically opening up Advantage online shopping, and then you instructing IntelliJ basically and UFT developer in sync to open up Edge Chromium as well locally and hit the same URL over there, right? So now if in case if we have to uh, execute this whole situation or scenario in a, a grid and you have to develop a grid and node system. So what we have to do is basically I have another piece of code which is basically tweaked upon to incorporate those changes for UFT developers. So here you will see that I have the same function basically, but what I have added is browser description. So here you will see the browser description is basically what it tells that you can open or execute this test case on a Chrome browser, and I'm just providing a OS type as well. So here OS type is Windows and the browser type is basically Chrome. So if you look at this Chrome Windows part of it. So now if I go to Edge Windows function, basically what this tells, we are instructing UFT developer to execute this test scenario basically on OS type called Windows again, but this time you choose Edge Chromium. So that is the whole scenario, right? So this is how UFT developer grid and nodes can be in, you can say, accomplished. The whole system can be written in that way or set up in that way basically in order to execute this kind of scenario. It's more to like a parallel execution or on a different browser, right? So that UFT developer grid and nodes provides. Okay, so in order to trigger the execution for using grid and node setup, I need to basically shut down my local UFT developer runtime engine, which I was using to show you how locally this thing UFT developer works. So now I need to shut down that the UFT runtime engine and basically trigger the UFT developer grid node basically on my local. So it is kind of like I'm acting or changing my local system as a grid manager, and now we have also two remote machines who will be acting as a node for us. So let's go ahead and initiate that step as well, where I'm going to convert this machine as grid manager and those two remote machines as a grid node for whole UFT developer grid and node environment setup. Okay, so basically now we are going to see how this execution happens on UFT developer grid and nodes for the same setup which we did for a local execution, right? So what we are going to do is now basically the same script I have over here. Now I'm going to trigger UFT developer runtime grid basically so that this local system start working or behaving as a UFT developer grid manager, and that uh, services has been started. And if you look at the right hand side, UFT developer grid system has been triggered, and I can open up the settings of that. And here you will see I can have different add-ins. Basically, here I have just web for our demo purpose. This is engine port, basically 5095, and this is grid management port 8080. So engine port is basically the port which will be used to connect grid and nodes, and 8080 is for opening up the grid manager admin portal. So you can also have a remote secured and non-secured connection. So for the demo purpose, I'm using non-secured connectivity between grid manager and grid node of UFT developer. So now, as we have already initiated, this is uh, the console of grid manager. Here you will see we have two nodes connected, 0 session, and 1 license has been hosted. So I have already prepared the connectivity here, but I'll show you how the connectivity or between these machines happens. So I'm going to open one of the node or the virtual machine here, which is 2019 server, and I need to open UFT developer runtime grid node services. So I see grid and I have UFT developer runtime. So I need to basically search for UFT developer grid node services, which is basically here. And I'm going to activate this. Once clicked on that, I can see a icon open up here, which tells me that the grid node services has been initiated, and I can open up the settings of that. So this is basically a virtual machine which is going to act as a grid node for us. So here you can see the add-ins is web selected for our purpose, and here you will find out different browsers which could be part of this grid. So I'm going to select Chrome over here, but I can again select different browsers over here. So it could be like different browsers on the same machine. So for demo, I'm just having uh, Chrome here, and this is the IP of Grid Manager, right? So I was mentioning 5095 is the port, which basically connects Grid Manager and the grid node of UFT developer. So I'm just testing the connectivity. It is verified and it's success. I'm going to save this settings. So this steps basically ensures that I have the connectivity between UFT developer grid manager and UFT developer node. Okay. So I'm going to do the same process on another machine, which is Windows 10 client machine. I'm going to trigger up UFT runtime grid node here. Which will open up again the services over here, and I'm going to open up the settings and do the same configuration except selection of browser, right? So I'm going to select Edge Chromium. That's what the scenario we have right now. So I'm going to select Edge Chromium and again provide the IPs of my grid manager, which is basically mentioned here with the 5095 port. Okay. So that basically I'll click on verify, and this is also succeeded, and we'll save it. So again, this is also connected with the whole in UFT developer grid and nodes environment setup. So now the next step would be basically uh, check here. So I can see Windows Server 2019 has a web add-in selected and a Chrome browser supported. And again, Windows 10 client has web and Chromium. So whatever we have selected there, it's popping up here. So here you'll see 0 out of 4, 0 out of 4. It's basically how many executions are happening. So now I will go to my IntelliJ UFT developer platform here and execute the test scenario. So execution has started, and I'm going to just refresh it here. You'll see 1 out of 4. So one execution has started on Windows 2019. And again, on Windows 10 also, it has started 1 out of 4. So basically execution is happening. And session, you will see one session, two nodes, and one license which has been consumed here for the execution. So now we get a pop-up that test has passed. Two tests basically, one is for Chrome and another is for Edge Chromium, right? So this is how it really works. And now again, we can see a view last run result, which will show me the execution result of UFT developer uh, in HTML format, and we'll see the same results over here with Chrome, Windows, and Edge Windows. So this is execution time, and we can also check the error list if there is any error being captured. So we don't have any errors over here, so it will be totally blank over here. Okay, so this is how it works, and on UFT developer grid and nodes. And coming to the license consumption of UFT developer grid, it's basically any UFT developer grid can handle 4 UFT developer operations at once for each license consumed. So in case if you are looking to enable UFT developer grid to run more than 4 operations simultaneously, you can use a concurrent license. And as the grid handles requests to run operations, it's basically it consumes your licenses, and once the operation or execution completes, the license will be released. So you also have a capability in grid runtime engine setting where you can basically provide the details in terms of controlling your license consumption, right? So you can also provide the maximum number of concurrent licenses that this grid machine can consume. And if there is a idle situation, if the operations are not happening, so you can also have timeout kind of configurations as well. So if the runtime engine remains active and ready to receive request, but if does not consume a license until it needs, and it basically runs another operation. So it may be connected to the license server of UFT, uh, but it will not be consuming any licenses until and unless an operations are happening on this grid setup. So yeah, that's it from my side. Thanks everybody for joining in.